Not every question wants to be answered. Some questions are traps designed not to lead you forward, but to hold you still. To force you to feel the tension between two truths, neither of which can be denied, and neither of which can fully win. Video is a journey through those questions, philosophical dilemmas with no right answer, not because we lack the information, but because the answers fracture under the weight of contradiction. What do you choose when kindness causes harm? When mercy denies justice? When the truth wounds more deeply than a lie? These aren't abstract puzzles. They live inside your relationships, your morals, your late-night thoughts. Each paradox you'll hear in the next 2 hours isn't meant to be solved. It's meant to sit beside you, to whisper, to remind you that wisdom isn't always clarity. Sometimes it's the courage to live inside complexity. So close your eyes, let go of certainty, and walk with us into the space where every answer is wrong and every silence says too much. Imagine a judge standing in a courtroom. The accused is guilty without question. The evidence is overwhelming. The damage is done. Victims still suffer. The public demands justice. But the judge, moved by mercy, offers a lenient sentence. Or none at all. Maybe it's a pardon. Maybe it's a quiet turning away. A forgiveness that feels noble, compassionate, even. And yet, what happens to the victim? What happens to those who witnessed the harm and hoped the world would be fair? What happens when mercy feels like betrayal? This is the dilemma. When mercy is shown, it can look like punishment to someone else, to show compassion to the wrongdoer. Maybe to abandon the one who was wronged. You might think of this as just a legal paradox, but it goes far deeper. Parents face it. Teachers face it. Lovers face it. Societies, entire nations face it. You want to be merciful because punishment alone rarely heals. But the moment you choose mercy, you may also choose to validate the harm, or even silence the pain it caused. You forgive the abuser. What message does that send to the abused? You pardon the enemy. What does that mean to those who suffered under their hands? And so mercy, which we're taught to value, starts to tremble in its moral foundation. Because mercy is selective, it must be. It chooses who to release, who to ease, who to save. And in doing so, it also chooses who will carry the weight instead. Now, picture a different version of this. Paradox, you're not the judge. You're the one who's been hurt. Someone wounded you deeply. They lied. They betrayed. They left. And now, time has passed. They ask for forgiveness. Not because they deserve it, but because they need it. You want peace. You want to move on. So you forgive them. You let go. And for a moment, you feel free, but somewhere, the wound remains. And something in you whispers, did I just let them walk away with no cost? This, as the pain mercy brings, it doesn't erase. It doesn't reverse. It simply stops the cycle. But not without consequences. In this way, mercy becomes a form of punishment, not to the wrongdoer, but to the one who chooses it. Because to be merciful is to carry what the other person should have carried. You shoulder their guilt. You absorb the story. You end the war by surrendering a part of yourself, and the world looks on, often confused, because our sense of justice wants things to balance. We want the guilty to pay. We want the innocent to be lifted. We want symmetry. Mercy disrupts that symmetry. It leaves justice unfinished. It leaves wounds visible, but untreated in the traditional sense. In this paradox, there's no clean outcome. If you punish harshly, you may become what you hate. If you forgive too easily, you risk erasing someone else's pain. If you stay silent, the cycle festers. If you speak, the burden returns. So what then? Maybe this paradox is not here to be solved, but to be understood differently. Perhaps mercy isn't the opposite of justice. Perhaps it is a deeper justice, one that recognizes punishment can never undo pain. It cannot make the past unhappen. So mercy steps in, not to erase the cost, but to redirect it from vengeance to growth, from retribution to transformation. But this is no easy thing. It costs you every time. So before you choose mercy, ask yourself, Who pays the price for it? Who is protected by it? And who might be erased because of it? Mercy is not weakness, but it is dangerous. And that is what makes it sacred, because when you choose mercy, knowing it may be misunderstood, knowing it may not bring closure, knowing it may hurt just as much as it heals, you are entering a moral battlefield with no clean victory. That battlefield is inside you and inside every system, every law, every heart thought. So the next time someone says, just forgive, remember this. Paradox.mercy can be an act of incredible strength, but it can also be a quiet storm that leaves both sides wondering who really won. We are taught to value the truth, to speak it, to seek it, to live by it. Truth is often positioned as the antidote to deception, the moral high ground, the path to clarity and resolution. But what happens when truth itself becomes the very thing that misleads? What happens when a truth, spoken without context, causes more damage than a lie ever could? This is the paradox. Truth, without compassion or wisdom, can deceive. Not because it is false, but because it is incomplete. Imagine this scenario. A child asks if their dying parent is going to be okay. You know they won't. Do you tell the truth? Is honesty still noble if it shatters the last bit of hope someone holds? Is it still right if it offers nothing but cold finality? Now, shift the lens. Consider the doctor who delivers a brutal diagnosis with sterile precision versus the one who softens it with care, even delay. Both may be telling the truth, but one may leave the patient feeling like a ticking clock. The other offers a path to live, however short, with some form of peace. So we see it clearly. Truth can be weaponized. It can be wielded like a blade, sharp, precise, but merciless. And in the wrong hands, it becomes a tool of manipulation. Disguised as virtue, you may have felt it yourself. That sting when someone says something brutally honest and justifies the cruelty by claiming they were only telling the truth. But honesty without care is often just disguised violence. On the opposite side, lies are almost always condemned. But in real life, white lies, half-truths, and gentle deflections often protect relationships, soothe anxiety, and allow people to function in moments when truth would destroy them. So where does that leave us? If lying is wrong and truth can still harm, then the moral clarity we hope for begins to blur. Some truths are dangerous not because they are false, but because they're too early, too bare, too isolated from the heart. And here lies the deeper complexity. A fact is not always the whole truth. It is only a piece. Without emotion, without timing, without understanding, a fact can do more to deceive than a well-meaning lie. Politicians use this trick often. They'll state a true statistic, but omit the crucial context. They'll tell part of the story and let the audience draw damning conclusions. And so, truth becomes a cloak for deception, a mask, an illusion of transparency that hides intent. This is why some truths feel more like betrayals. When someone tells your secret, for instance, yes, it's true, but they use it to wound you, to expose you, to elevate themselves by tearing you down. In those moments, you don't feel grateful for honesty. You feel invaded, manipulated, used. So now we face the unresolvable tension. Do we always owe each other the truth? Or do we owe each other care? Even when it means withholding, there is no universal answer. Only situational ethics, only context, only intent. And that's what makes this paradox so difficult. Because truth is not just about what is said. It's about why it's said, how it's said, and who is affected by it. When we reduce truth to cold data or rigid doctrine, we forget that human beings don't live in logic alone. We live in emotion, memory, perception, and sometimes the raw truth can collapse everything we've built to survive. So what do? We tread carefully. We remember that truth isn't a monolith, it's a living thing. It must be handled like fire, able to illuminate, but just as capable of burning down everything around it. There are moments in life where telling the truth is the bravest thing you can do. And others where silence is an act of mercy. You must learn to feel the difference. To tell the truth wisely is to tell it with empathy, to offer not just information, but meaning, not just fact, but presence. Because when truth becomes a tool of self-righteousness, it loses its power to connect. It becomes isolation. It becomes judgment. It becomes another mask we wear to avoid vulnerability. So the next time you find yourself saying, well, I was just being honest, pause. Ask yourself, was I offering truth? Or was I offering control? Because in the end, the most dangerous lie may be the one told with the truth. We're taught to be kind, to help when we can, to comfort the hurting, shield the vulnerable, and extend grace to those who struggle. Kindness is supposed to be gentle, healing, good. But what if beneath the warmth of our good intentions, kindness becomes a cage? This is the paradox. Kindness, if unexamined, can do harm, not because it's cruel, but because it removes difficulty that might have led to growth. Imagine a child learning to walk. Every time they fall, you rush in lifting them before they even try to rise. You never let them stumble, never let them cry. You think you're being loving. But over time, they stop learning to stand. They expect to be held. And without realizing it, your kindness has stolen their strength. Now, shift the lens. Picture someone close to you who's spiraling, caught in self-destructive behavior, or drowning in apathy. They call you again and again, asking for help, money, shelter, emotional support. You give it because you care. But the problems don't go away. In fact, they seem to grow. Each act of kindness becomes a new layer of dependency. Each helping hand becomes a bridge they never cross. Because you're always walking it for them, you're not helping anymore. You're enabling and the more you give, the more they shrink. Until finally, one day, you're not helping them live. You're helping them avoid living. This is the shadow of kindness. We often think of harm as loud, abuse, betrayal, neglect, but there's a softer kind of harm. The kind that whispers, I'll fix this for you, when what's needed is, you must fix this yourself. Kindness becomes harmful when it takes away responsibility, when we give to ease our own discomfort with someone else's suffering. Rather than to empower them to rise on their own, it's not that kindness is wrong. But unbound kindness without boundaries, without awareness, without the courage to say no, becomes a subtle form of control. It says, I know what you need better than you do. It says, I can't stand to watch you struggle, so I'll remove the struggle. But in doing so, it also removes the transformation that comes from wrestling with life. This paradox shows up everywhere in relationships, where one partner carries all the emotional weight, telling themselves they're being supportive, when really they're protecting someone from growing in politics, where policies designed to help the vulnerable sometimes trap them in cycles of dependence in parenting, where overprotection creates fragility instead of resilience in friendships, where honest feedback is replaced with constant validation because we fear hurting feelings more than we value truth. It's not easy to see when kindness has gone too far because the world applauds kindness. It's comforting, appealing, but kindness that never says enough becomes a shield, a way to avoid confrontation, to avoid being the bad guy. And sometimes the truly kind thing is the hardest thing to say. I love you, but I can't fix this for you. To say, I believe in you enough to let you struggle. That kind of kindness is terrifying because it risks being misunderstood. It may be seen as cold, distant, or cruel, but it's not that. It's courageous. It's loving in its highest form because it trusts the other person to rise, even when that means letting them fall. To practice this kind of kindness, you must let go of control. You must accept that your role is not to rescue everyone. And you must learn that boundaries are not the absence of love. They are the container that makes love sustainable. This paradox is especially painful for those who feel deeply. Empaths, helpers, healers. You see suffering and your instinct is to soothe. But soothing without discernment can be another form of escape, not from their pain, but from your dot. It's easier to give than to witness someone struggle. Easier to fix than to face their discomfort. But life isn't always meant to be easy. And growth really is dots. So what do? We begin by asking hard questions. Am I helping or am I rescuing? Is this kindness building them or keeping them small? Am I offering support or avoiding guilt? And most of all, am I being kind or just afraid of being unkind? Because true kindness doesn't just comfort, it challenges, it uplifts. It invites the other person into their full strength. Even if that means walking away dot. So next time you find yourself reaching out to help, pause and ask, is this the help they need? Or the help I need to feel like a good person? Because the deepest kindness isn't the one that avoids pain. It's the one that honors the journey even when it hurts. Freedom, the ultimate aspiration. The highest good in countless cultures and philosophies. To be free is to be unchained, unrestricted, ungoverned by anything except one's own will. We fight for it. We die for it. We glorify it in songs and stories. But what if freedom, the very thing meant to liberate us, becomes a form of enslavement? This is the paradox. Total freedom, without limits or grounding, can trap us just as deeply as any prison. Picture a man who inherits unlimited wealth and time. No boss, no deadlines, no expectations. He can travel anywhere, buy anything, do whatever he pleases. At first, it feels like paradise. He eats, he drinks, he indulges. He avoids discomfort. He skips all obligation. But slowly, quietly, he begins to feel the weight of it. With no one to answer to, he forgets what discipline feels like. With no structure, time begins to blur. With no challenge, joy becomes dull. And worst of all, with no purpose greater than himself, he begins to disappear. Inside his own desires, what he thought was freedom was only a beautifully wrapped cage. This paradox haunts modern life. We are freer than ever to choose our careers, our partners, our beliefs, our identities. And yet, anxiety, depression, and dissatisfaction are rising. Why? Because absolute freedom comes with a hidden burden, endless choice. And with endless choice comes endless uncertainty. When nothing is off limits, nothing feels anchored. You can change your life at any moment. But that also means you're constantly afraid you chose wrong. This phenomenon has a name: choice paralysis. We become frozen, overwhelmed, not by oppression, but by liberty. By the pressure to always optimize, always upgrade, always find something better. And slowly, the freedom to choose becomes a prison of perfectionism. Now imagine a child raised with no rules, no bedtime, no school, no limits. At first, they might rejoice, but soon they become anxious, directionless, insecure, because freedom without guidance doesn't feel safe. It feels like abandonment. We see this in relationships too. The promise of freedom is sometimes used to avoid commitment, accountability, or intimacy. But real freedom isn't the absence of responsibility. It's the power to choose responsibility. Willingly. And when you refuse to choose anything that binds you, you remain unrooted, drifting, free. Yes, but also deeply alone. There's a reason monasteries, martial arts schools, and artist residencies are built on strict routines. And they understand that discipline and devotion don't diminish freedom. They channel it. True freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's knowing what you want is worth doing, even when it's hard. Because when everything is possible, nothing feels meaningful until you commit. This paradox also plays out in societies. A country may guarantee freedom of speech, but when that freedom is weaponized to spread hate, misinformation, or division, does it still serve the people? Or does it begin to unravel the very fabric of unity? The line between liberty and chaos is thin. We tell ourselves that rules restrict us. But often, it's the right rules that protect us, that give shape to our days, that help us prioritize what matters. Think of music. It's a form of expression of freedom. But it relies on structure, tempo, scales, timing. Remove those, and you don't have freedom. You have noise dot. So how do we escape the trap of unlimited freedom? By choosing boundaries. By embracing limits that align with values. By recognizing that freedom needs a frame, like fire in a hearth. Freedom burns brightest when contained by meaning. That might mean choosing one path and letting go of others, not because they're wrong, but because you've chosen to go deep. Not wide dot, it might mean saying no to constant novelty and saying yes to depth. Devotion, mastery dot, it might mean accepting the responsibilities of love. Even when independence whispers that you could leave, the modern world sells freedom as indulgence. But the soul craves something deeper, the freedom to belong, the freedom to serve. The freedom to grow dot and growth by its nature always requires some kind of structure, some kind of surrender. The great irony is this: we only become truly free when we give part of ourselves to something larger dot, to a purpose, to a practice, to a person, to a path dot. So the next time you chase freedom, ask yourself, is this leading me closer to who I want to become? Or is it just protecting me from discomfort? Because freedom that avoids all pain often avoids all transformation to dot, and that is its most seductive trap. We are raised to believe in justice, that wrongs will be punished, that victims will be heard. That fairness is the bedrock of civilization. Justice, we're told, is not vengeance. It is balance. It's Lady Justice, blindfolded and holding scales unmoved. By bias, driven only by truth. It's the courtroom, the gavel, the rule of law, but reality tells a different story. The paradox of justice that betrays lives in every courtroom where the guilty walk free. In every historical moment when laws protected the oppressor. In every personal experience where telling the truth only made things worse, that you do the right thing. You speak up, you trust the system, and the system turns its back on you. Justice in theory is noble, but justice in practice can be manipulated. It can be bought, delayed, denied, or distorted beyond recognition. That's the first crack in the illusion. Justice is not a universal truth. It is a human creation. And like all human creations, it reflects our flaws. Think of whistleblowers. People who risk everything to expose wrongdoing. What happens to them? They're fired, blacklisted, threatened, sometimes in prison. The system they tried to help betrays them. Or imagine a survivor of assault going through the legal process. She tells her story, endures cross-examination, and then the verdict comes, not guilty. Not because the act didn't happen, but because it couldn't be proven. Justice fails her. Now imagine the opposite. Someone falsely accused, railroaded by media, condemned before trial. Years lost behind bars for a crime they didn't commit. Jenna later clears them, but can justice give back time? Sometimes justice isn't just slow, it's broken. And here lies the paradox. Justice is supposed to protect us, but it can become the very thing that wounds us. Why? Because justice often relies on rules, and rules are fixed. But life is messy. Human stories don't always fit into neat categories of guilt and innocence. Motives are murky. Contexts are ignored. And the system prefers clarity over complexity. But real justice isn't found in the rigidity of law. It lives in the uncomfortable gray. It requires listening, understanding, compassion, accountability. But those are difficult, time-consuming. They don't fit on a form. And so we create shortcuts. Plea deals, mandatory minimums, 3 strikes laws, zero tolerance policies. Efficiency becomes more important than fairness, and justice becomes betrayal in disguise. In your personal life, you might have felt this paradox too. Maybe you forgave someone who hurt you because it felt just to give them a second chance, but they hurt you again. Your mercy was met with manipulation. Or maybe you sought closure from someone who wronged you. You told your truth, expecting apology or understanding. And instead, you were met with silence or worse, denial. justice didn't arrive. You were left holding the weight of what was never acknowledged. The deeper you look, the more justice begins to resemble faith. It requires belief in something unseen, that fairness exists, that systems can work, that truth matters. And when that belief breaks, the betrayal cuts deep, not just because you were hurt, but because something sacred was violated. So what do? Abandon justice? No, but we must stop worshiping it as a perfect ideal. Justice is not a fixed point. It's a horizon we keep walking toward. It's a question, not an answer. And its betrayal reminds us not to trust systems blindly, but to keep rebuilding them with eyes open. We must widen our view of justice. Beyond punishment, beyond law, toward restoration, toward healing. In some cultures, justice means bringing the harmed and the harmer into the same room, not to argue, but to listen, to share stories, to repair what can be repaired. It's not always clean or satisfying, but it's real, because justice that ignores pain in the name of rules is not justice. It's betrayal dressed in robes. And justice that seeks only retribution doesn't fix what was broken. It simply creates more fracture. True justice is uncomfortable. It requires us to hold opposing truths at once. That people can do harm and still be human. That healing doesn't always come from punishment. That sometimes closure is an illusion, and living without it is part of being whole. In this paradox, you are asked not to give up on justice, but to stop expecting it to be perfect, to see its cracks, to acknowledge its harm, and to keep searching for the kind of justice that doesn't just punish, but understands. Because if we keep pretending justice is infallible, we blind ourselves to its failures, and we leave those it betrays behind. But if we accept the paradox that justice can wound as well as heal, then maybe we'll stop using it as a weapon and start treating it like a responsibility. Love is often painted as the highest freedom. We say things like follow your heart and love who you choose. We believe that love at its best is autonomous, a deliberate offering of the self to another. But what happens when love arises without choice? What happens when you love someone not because you decided to, but because you can't not? This is the paradox. Can it still be love if you didn't choose it? And if you did choose it, was it ever really love at all? Some loves arrive uninvited. A glance, a laugh, a presence that rearranges your internal world without permission. You didn't ask for it. You didn't plan for it. But now it's there, anchored deep in the folds of your being. Maybe it's someone you can't have. Someone who doesn't feel the same. Or someone whose love would destroy everything you've built, your commitments, your identity, your safety. But the feeling remains inescapable, real. And yet it defies the definition of free will. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a surrender. Or worse, a capture? Does that make it less valid or more dangerous? We like to think of ourselves as the authors of our emotional lives. But some emotions write themselves. Love, in particular, often shows up like weather, suddenly, violently, leaving you drenched in a storm you didn't see coming. And this leads to guilt, because we believe we should be in control, that we should love the person who's good for us, that we shouldn't love the person who's already taken, or who hurt us, or who doesn't love us back. But the heart doesn't always care about should. It beats to its own rhythm. Sometimes, maddeningly so. You might ask, what good is a love that you cannot act on? What is the point of a love you didn't choose? Perhaps its purpose isn't to be fulfilled. Perhaps it's to reveal the parts of yourself you didn't know were waiting. The hunger for beauty, the ache for connection, the longing to be seen in a way no one else has ever managed. Even unrequited or impossible love can awaken something profound. It may not lead to romance or relationship, but it may lead to understanding. Yet there's a darker side to this paradox. Because if love is not a choice, then what responsibility do we have for it? Can we blame someone for falling in love with the wrong person? Can we fault ourselves for hearts that refuse to obey? In extreme cases, the idea of no-choice love becomes a justification for harm. I couldn't help it, we say. I just love them too much. And so the paradox deepens. When does love that isn't chosen become obsession? When does feeling uncontrollable become dangerous? Perhaps the answer lies in how we respond to the unchosen feeling. We may not choose what we feel, but we choose what we do with those feelings. You may not choose to love someone, but you choose whether to honor their boundaries. You choose whether to turn your longing into poetry or control. You choose whether to let the love grow silently within you, or demand that the world make space for it. There's power in that nuance. In fact, the most mature love may not be the one we chose, but the one we didn't choose and still respected. Parent who continues to love their child through estrangement. The friend who steps back from a love that would ruin the friendship. The person who holds love quietly in their chest, asking nothing in return. These are not stories of romantic triumph. They are stories of emotional discipline, of the grace to carry unchosen love without inflicting it on others. And they challenge us to redefine love altogether. Not as possession, not even as expression, but as presence. To love someone without needing to have them. To feel the full storm of emotion and still choose stillness. That perhaps is the highest love of all. So what does this paradox teach us? That love at its core is both involuntary and sacred. That while we may not always choose who we love, we can always choose how we love. And sometimes the most powerful act of love is not to pursue, confess, or claim, but simply to feel and let be. To know that love can arrive uninvited and still make you more human, even if it never speaks, even if it never ends. We often hear that sacrifice is noble, that to give something up for the sake of others, your comfort, your dreams, your life is the highest expression of love or belief. But what if the sacrifice goes unnoticed? What if it doesn't make a difference? What if it changes nothing? This is the paradox. Can a sacrifice still be noble if it has no meaning? If no one benefits? If no one even knows it happened? We are wired to believe that sacrifice must have purpose. A soldier dies for their country. A parent gives up everything for their child. A protester puts their body on the line to be heard. These are sacrifices we revere because they seem to accomplish something. They echo. They move others. They shift the world even slightly. But what about the unseen sacrifices? The mother, who gives up her art to feed her family and no one ever knows. The friend who quietly walks away from a toxic relationship without explanation. The teacher who defends a student and is fired for it, not celebrated, not remembered. Just dismissed. What about the sacrifices that don't work? The people who march and are ignored. The whistleblowers who are crushed. The quiet daily compromises of conscience, made in silence, that slowly wear a person down. Is a sacrifice still meaningful if nothing changes? Or does it become just pain? We struggle with this because we want suffering to matter. We want it to be part of some moral equation. Pain in, justice out. But life doesn't always work like that. Sometimes the world is indifferent. Sometimes your greatest act of love is swallowed whole by silence. No applause, no ripple, no legacy. So why do it? Why give something precious away if it's just going to vanish into nothing? The answer lies in what sacrifice means to you, not to the world. Sometimes we sacrifice not for impact, but to stay true to who we are. Imagine a prisoner who refuses to betray a friend under torture. No one will ever know. There's no camera. No monument will be built in their honor. But to speak the name would be to become someone else. To abandon a principle that defines them. The sacrifice has no reward, but it preserves something invisible. Integrity. In that sense, sacrifice without meaning to the world can still have profound meaning to the self, but even that explanation doesn't always comfort. What if your sacrifice breaks you? What if the pain leaves you hollow and the world still spins unaffected? There are stories of people who gave everything to movements that failed. Artists who died unknown. Activists whose causes disappeared. Parents who lost the very children they gave everything for. It's tempting to look at those stories and ask, Was it worth it? Should they have just chosen peace over purpose? But that assumes meaning can only be measured by outcomes. What if it can also be measured by intention? To choose to lose something, time, comfort, love, safety, for the sake of something you believed mattered, even if you were wrong, is still an act of profound humanity. It's the reminder that we are not machines of utility. We are beings of belief. We live for things we can't always prove. We stand for things we can't always explain. And sometimes we fall for things that no one else will ever understand. That's the tragedy and the beauty of sacrifice without meaning. Because sometimes its only meaning is that it was made. It speaks to the part of us that chooses depth over safety, honor over comfort, truth over reward. Of course, this paradox also warns us. Because not all sacrifices are wise. Some are made out of guilt. Some are made out of pride. Some are made because we were told we had to. Sacrificing yourself for something that doesn't align with your values or that exploits your goodness isn't noble. It's tragic. So we must ask ourselves, is this sacrifice aligned with who I am? Even if no one sees it? Even if nothing changes? If the answer is yes, then maybe meaning doesn't have to come from outside. Maybe the act itself is the meaning, the quiet refusal to give up what you stand for, the silent yes to someone else's dignity, the invisible cost you chose to bear, not because it would be remembered, but because you couldn't live with yourself if you hadn't. And perhaps that's the highest meaning of all. Not the change you make, but the person you remain. Peace is usually seen as the goal, the resolution after conflict, the harmony after chaos. The quiet after the storm. We praise peace as a virtue, a moral achievement, a societal treasure, but peace can also be destructive because not all peace is built on justice. Some peace is built on silence, on submission, on fear. This is the paradox. What if peace in some forms is more damaging than conflict? What if the absence of war isn't the presence of good? Think of the family where no one ever raises their voice because they're all too afraid to. Think of the country where protests never happen because the government has crushed all dissent. Think of the relationship where both people smile politely while resentment rots quietly beneath the surface. On the outside, it looks peaceful. No fighting, no screaming, no chaos. But inside, something vital is dying. True peace is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of justice, the presence of truth, the presence of balance. And sometimes getting there requires disruption. There's a kind of peace that asks you to betray yourself, to stay quiet when your heart is screaming, to nod when you should protest, to keep the peace at the expense of your voice. And that kind of peace is not peace. It's paralysis. You've likely seen this in your own life. Moments when someone said, "Don't make a scene," or "It's not worth the fight," or "Let it go for now." Sometimes they're right. Not every battle is worth waging. Not every discomfort demands a confrontation. But sometimes those phrases are used to keep the status quo intact, to discourage change, to keep the powerful unchallenged, to reward passivity instead of courage. And that light, peace becomes a weapon. It becomes a way to shame those who want justice. It becomes a reason to stay silent about abuse. It becomes a justification for not rocking the boat, even when the boat is sinking. This paradox is especially dangerous in political and social contexts. History is filled with peaceful eras where oppression reigned quietly. Colonial rule, segregation, apartheid. These systems maintained order. But they did so by destroying the dignity, rights, and lives of entire populations. To outsiders. There were no riots, no wars, no chaos. But inside there was deep suffocating injustice. So when peace demands silence, we must ask, peace for whom? Whose comfort is being protected? Whose suffering is being ignored? Often, peace is demanded by those already safe, those with power, those who fear losing their advantage if conflict arises. But for the unheard, for the marginalized, conflict may be the only path to peace. got not violence, but disruption, truth-telling, boundary setting, resistance. Sometimes raising your voice is the most peaceful thing you can do because it makes room for honesty, for change, for healing. Of course, not all conflict leads to good. We've all seen fights that destroy more than they solve, anger that consumes, war that ravages, hatred masquerading as justice. So the goal is not endless rebellion. The goal is earned peace, peace that was forged through understanding, through fairness, through hard conversations and brave confrontations. This kind of peace isn't quiet. It's vibrant. It breathes. It can handle discomfort. And most importantly, it makes space for everyone, not just the powerful in relationships. This means allowing disagreement. It means saying, I don't like this, even if it creates tension in families. It means not sweeping things under the rug, but gently pulling the rug back and saying, let's look at what we've hidden. In society, it means questioning policies that maintain order, but punish the vulnerable and within yourself. It means not forcing yourself to be calm when your soul is on fire, because there's a kind of peace that numbs. That deadens the spirit. That makes everything look fine, even while it's falling apart. Real peace doesn't do that. Real peace invites truth, even when it's messy. So, what does this paradox teach us? That peace is not always good. That sometimes it must be disrupted in order to be real. That the quietest room is not always the healthiest one. It teaches us to be suspicious of comfort that costs too much. To ask whether our peace is built on suppression or on honesty. And most of all, it reminds us that peace is not the end of the story. It's a process, a dialogue, a tension we must constantly tend. Because if your peace requires you to betray your truth, then it's not peace. It's a cage. Faith is often celebrated as one of humanity's highest virtues. To believe in something unseen, to trust without proof, to walk without knowing where the path ends. But what happens when that faith defies all evidence? What if belief persists in the face of contradiction, silence, or absence? This is the paradox. Can faith still be noble when there is nothing to support it, no reason, no confirmation at all? Or does faith without evidence become delusion? From religion to relationships, politics to personal purpose, faith surrounds us. The soldier believes in the mission, even when the war looks lost. The parent believes their child will change, even after 100 broken promises. The spiritual seeker believes in a higher order to the universe, even when tragedy offers no meaning. Some would say this is beautiful. That faith is what separates us from machines. That to believe despite evidence is to connect to something greater than logic, hope, loyalty, love. But others would say this is dangerous. That belief without evidence leads to fanaticism, to blind allegiance, to trusting con artists, corrupt leaders, or destructive ideas simply because they feel right. So which is it? Is faith without evidence a light in the darkness or a refusal to see the truth? Philosophers have wrestled with this question for centuries. Pascal argued that it was safer to believe in God even without proof, because if you're wrong, you lose nothing, but if you're right, you gain everything. Kierkegaard believed that true faith required a leap, a surrender of reason into the absurd. Nietzsche mocked this, calling faith a denial of reality, a coward's way out. And science? Science demands evidence. It thrives on observation, testing, verification. Faith, by definition, begins where evidence ends. It asks you to believe anyway, but this doesn't just apply to religion. Think of the artist who keeps painting despite endless rejection, the lover who stays loyal despite distance and doubt, the dreamer who builds something no one else can see. Their faith has no data to back it up. And yet, they persist. Sometimes, faith is the fuel that gets us through the impossible, the thread that holds us together when reason would say give up. But here's where the paradox tightens. How do you know when your faith is noble and when it's harmful? Because faith without evidence can also trap you. It can make you stay in a toxic relationship, believing they'll change. It can make you follow a cult leader off a cliff, It can make you deny reality over and over, even when the truth is screaming in your face. So what's the difference between hope and delusion? Some say it's about how you hold your faith. Is your faith open, humble, flexible, willing to be questioned? Or is it rigid, absolute, defensive, hostile to doubt? Open faith says, I believe, but I'm still listening. I trust, but I'm willing to grow. I hope, but I don't pretend to know. Rigid faith says, I believe, and if you don't, you're wrong. I don't care about the evidence. I will never change. The first kind of faith can be inspiring. It helps people survive, endure, love, create. The second kind can be terrifying. It leads to wars, persecution, hatred. But here's the hardest part. You don't always know which kind of faith you're holding until it breaks, until the person you trusted betrays you, until the movement you followed leads nowhere, until the prayers go unanswered again and again. Then you're left with the ashes of belief. And the question, was I wrong to believe? Some people, faced with that, shut down. They decide never to believe again, never to love, never to trust others. Double down. They refuse to let go, even when it's killing them. But there's another path. To let your faith evolve. To let doubt sharpen it, not destroy it. To say, I believed. It didn't turn out how I thought, but I still value what that belief gave me, because faith isn't just about outcomes. Sometimes it's about identity, about becoming the kind of person who chooses trust, even when the world makes it hard. This doesn't mean you ignore red flags or pretend everything will be okay. That means you learn to walk the line between hope and realism, trust and awareness, belief and humility. You recognize that faith without evidence can be beautiful, but only if it stays curious. When it becomes dogma, it loses its soul. So the next time you find yourself believing in something no one else can see, ask not just what you believe, but how you believe it. Are you open to truth wherever it leads? Are you willing to let your faith grow, or even die if it means finding something more honest? Because maybe the deepest kind of faith is not the one that never doubts, but the one that dares to doubt and still finds a reason to believe. Silence is often misunderstood. We associate it with calm, with peace, with composure, with nothingness. But silence is not always empty. Sometimes it holds more weight than words ever could. This is the paradox. Silence can be louder than a scream. It can scream with pain, protest, guilt, grief, or rage without making a sound. You've felt this, haven't you? The moment when someone stops replying. When the conversation dries up not from resolution, but because something broke, the heavy quiet between two people who once spoke with ease. Or the hush after an argument, thick with tension, where nothing is said, but everything is known. Silence can be a sanctuary, a refuge from noise, a space to think, to breathe, to reset. But it can also be a weapon, used to ignore, to manipulate, to punish. There is the silence of presence, when two people sit together in mutual understanding. No words needed. And then there's the silence of absence, when someone withdraws, disappears, disconnects. That silence shouts. It shouts rejection. Neglect. A message not sent with words, but with void. In relationships, this paradox becomes raw. Someone asks, what's wrong? And the other says, nothing, then says nothing else. The room fills with unspoken things, doubts, fears, accusations, none of them voiced. All of them felt. In society, silence takes on political weight. When people witness injustice but say nothing, that silence echoes louder than protest. It becomes complicity. Endorsement by omission. Think of the bystander who watches a bully hurt someone, but says nothing. The company that stays quiet during a scandal. The friend who disappears during your hardest days. The history books that omit uncoverable truths. Each moment of silence leaves a gap, and in that gap, we hear something. Silence can be merciful, but it can also be deafening. So how do we understand what silence means? That's part of the paradox, because silence is ambiguous. It can mean wisdom, choosing not to speak when words would harm. or cowardice, failing to speak when words. And needed dot, it can be restraint, holding back. Anger to avoid a fight, or it can be coldness, refusing to engage when someone reaches out dot, it depends on context. On relationship, unintention dot, and sometimes even you don't know why you're being silent. Maybe you're scared, maybe you're hurt, maybe you don't have the words yet, or maybe you're trying to say something that language can't hold. Silence can be sacred. In meditation, in mourning, in awe, think of standing at the edge of a vast canyon or beneath the stars and how silence deepens that moment. But then think of the silence after bad news when no one knows what to say, so they say nothing. And that nothing hurts. This paradox teaches us something essential. We are always communicating, even in silence. Our pauses speak, our absence speaks. Even our unwillingness to speak speaks dot, so we must ask, what is my silence saying? Is it giving someone space or making them feel abandoned? Is it protecting peace or avoiding responsibility? Am I being silent to listen or to disappear? Because if you don't ask, your silence might say something you don't mean dot sometimes. We silence ourselves out of fear. Fear of conflict, fear of vulnerability, fear of being wrong. And yet, every time we choose silence over honesty, we let something important go unsaid. We lose opportunities to connect, to clarify, to heal. But speaking isn't always the answer either. Not all noise is truth. Some people shout to avoid hearing. Some talk so much they drown in their own words. There's such a thing as loud silence, the kind that draws people in. That makes space for the truth to rise. And that's where the real power of this paradox lives, not in rejecting silence, but in choosing it mindfully dot to hold silence with presence. To speak when it matters, and to remain quiet when it deepens, meaning dot to use silence not as a weapon or a wall, but as a doorway into what lies beneath our endless words dot in a world that rewards. Constant noise, online arguments, 24/7's media, instant reactions. Silence can feel radical dot, it takes courage to be quiet when everyone is shouting. And it takes wisdom to know when that quiet is helping and when it's hurting dot, so listen closely to the silences in your life. The ones you keep, the ones you break, the ones you offer dot, and remember, silence can destroy, or it can heal dot, it can isolate, or it can unite dot, it can suffocate, or it can breathe. The question is not whether to be silent or not. The question is, what are you trying to say by not saying anything at all? Hope is supposed to move us, to keep us going when things are difficult, to shine like a light at the end of the tunnel, pulling us forward with promises of something better. But what if that same hope, so bright, so pure, starts to weigh us down? What if hope becomes the very reason we don't act? This is the paradox. Hope, meant to inspire action, can sometimes prevent it. We become so attached to the dream that we stop engaging with reality. A person in a toxic relationship might stay because they hope things will improve. A struggling artist might never change course because they hope the world will recognize their genius. A nation may remain stagnant, hoping for a better leader, a better system, while refusing to build it themselves. Hope whispers, wait, just a little longer. Things will get better, and sometimes they do. But sometimes they don't, and still we wait. We wait because acting might destroy the hope. We wait because facing the truth feels like surrendering to despair. We wait because doing something means risking failure. And it's safer to hope than to risk dot. This is the trap. Hope can freeze you dot. It can become a kind of emotional comfort food. Sweet, familiar, endlessly consumable, but ultimately unhealthy in excess. You sit by the window, hoping someone will come. You stare at the ceiling, hoping the answer will appear. You keep replaying what you'll do when things get better, but never actually do it. You live in someday. Someday I'll leave. Someday I'll start. Someday I'll be happy. Someday never comes, because hope has become your home and also your cage dot. So how do we break the cycle? How do we keep hope from becoming paralysis? We begin by seeing that not all hope is created equal. There's active hope, the kind that motivates you to work, to strive, to improve. And there's passive hope, the kind that sedates you, that lets you off the hook, that tells you the universe will handle it all while you sit still. Active hope says, I believe things can get better, but I must act to help them. Passive hope says, if I wait long enough, things will fix themselves. The difference is subtle but life-changing, because passive hope sounds nice. It feels good. It soothes your anxiety, but it also robs your agency. It tricks you into thinking that faith alone is enough. And when the world doesn't deliver, you don't know what went wrong. You blame yourself. Or worse, you double down on hope, thinking you just didn't believe hard enough. But maybe the problem wasn't your faith. It was your stillness. Sometimes we use hope as an excuse to avoid hard truths. We hope someone will change instead of confronting them. We hope a job will fulfill us instead of searching for meaning. We hope for peace while avoiding the work of justice. Hope becomes a shield, but also a mask. We say we're hopeful when really we're afraid. So what's the alternative? Should we abandon hope altogether? No, but we must learn to hope honestly. Too. Hope without detaching from reality. To hope while still grieving. Acting, risking. Hope is powerful, but only when it partners with courage. Hope without courage is a lullaby. Hope with courage is a battle cry. One keeps you dreaming. The other wakes you up. This is the heart of the paradox. Hope can be the fire that drives you, or the fog that blinds you. It can give you strength, or lull you to sleep. The difference lies not in the hope itself, but in what you do with it. So ask yourself, is your hope helping you move forward? Or is it keeping you still? Is it giving you strength to act? Or permission to avoid? Are you waiting on the world to change? Or are you changing within the waiting? Because true hope is not a fantasy. It's a discipline. It's not just belief in a better world, but the commitment to help build it. Even if you never see it complete. It's the willingness to try, to stumble, to fail, to get up again. Not because you know it will work, but because you believe it's worth trying. That kind of hope doesn't paralyze. It ignites. Forgiveness is often praised as one of the highest virtues. To forgive is to let go, to move on, to cleanse yourself of bitterness and reclaim peace. But what happens when forgiveness becomes endless? What happens when there's no line, no boundary, no moment where enough is enough? This is the paradox. Forgiveness, when offered without limit, can become a silent permission for harm. It begins innocently enough. Someone hurts you. They say sorry. You forgive. Then it happens again. And again. And again, you forgive not because the pain is gone, but because you've been told that's what good people do. That forgiveness is strength. That withholding it is weakness or cruelty or ego. But each time you forgive without consequence, you reinforce the idea that the wound didn't matter. That your pain can be erased with an apology. That your boundaries are flexible, or worse, invisible. Forgiveness becomes not a release, but a cycle. Not healing, but erasure. You begin to wonder, is this really compassion, or is it compliance? Forgiveness is supposed to be an act of freedom. But when given without discernment, it becomes submission dressed in virtue. People weaponize this. They hurt you, then demand your forgiveness as proof of your morality. If you were truly good, you'd let it go. If you really cared, you'd move on. If you're still upset, you're the problem. Suddenly forgiveness becomes a test. Not of their character, but of yours. You're not allowed to be angry or hurt or cautious because you forgave them, didn't you? And if you forgave them, shouldn't everything be fine? But some wounds don't heal with a simple, I'm sorry. Some apologies come without change. Some acts are so severe, so violating, that forgiveness feels like betrayal, not just of yourself, but of justice. This is where the paradox cuts deepest, because forgiveness is powerful. It can free you, but it must be your choice, not your obligation. And it must come with wisdom. Forgiving someone doesn't mean letting them back in. It doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean excusing. It means releasing your need for revenge, but not abandoning your need for protection. You can forgive someone and still hold them accountable. You can release resentment and still keep your distance. You can wish someone peace while refusing to let them cause you more harm. Unlimited forgiveness often masquerades as virtue, but it can be a symptom of low self-worth. A belief that your pain doesn't matter, that your role is to absorb damage and keep smiling, especially in families and relationships. In religions, we're taught to forgive because it keeps the peace, but peace at the cost of truth isn't peace. It's denial, and denial it turns forgiveness into rot. So how do we break the cycle? We start by asking, who is forgiveness for? Is it for them to soothe their guilt, or for you to reclaim your agency? Healthy forgiveness is active, not passive. It doesn't just erase. It reckons. It sets terms. It protects. It says, I choose to release this pain, but I will not pretend it didn't happen. I choose to stop carrying this anger, but I will not let it repeat. Forgiveness with limits is not cruelty. It's self-respect, because endless forgiveness invites endless violation. It teaches people that apologies matter more than actions. That harm has no cost. And over time, it teaches you that your pain isn't real, or important, or worthy of protection. That's not healing, that's surrender. Forgiveness should not be a reflex. It should be a decision made with care, with clarity, with boundaries intact. It should say, I am not defined by what you did to me. But also, I will not forget what you did, nor will I let it happen again. Some people don't deserve another chance. Some bridges should stay burned. Some closures come not from forgiveness, but from finally walking away. And that, too, can be holy. This paradox reminds us that even the most sacred ideas, like forgiveness, must be wielded with discernment, unconditional love, unlimited patience, boundless compassion. These sound beautiful, but without limits, they become doorways for exploitation. Even light, when too intense, can blind. So forgive, yes, and you're ready. When it's safe, when it heals, but do not confuse forgiveness with forgetting, nor tolerance with trust, nor surrender with strength. You can be kind and still walk away. You can be good and still say no. You can forgive and still protect yourself. Because sometimes forgiveness must have boundaries to mean anything at all. Happiness, we're told, is the goal, the prize, the destination at the end of all struggle. We're taught to chase it, buy it, build our lives around it. Books are written about it. Careers are shaped in pursuit of it. We make decisions, big and small, based on the promise of its arrival. But what happens when the thing we chase hurts us? What if happiness becomes the very thing that breaks us? This is the paradox. Happiness, when pursued at all costs, can lead to pain. It sounds counterintuitive. How could joy bring suffering? Yet the stories are everywhere. A person stays in a toxic relationship because it used to make them happy, clinging to a memory while enduring mistreatment. Another sacrifices their health, time, and relationships for a job that once gave them purpose, but now only gives them anxiety. People push away grief, anger, or fear because those feelings disrupt the illusion of happiness. In the pursuit of happiness, we sometimes become afraid of anything that isn't. We deny pain. We fake smiles. We lie to ourselves. We confuse comfort with joy, numbness with peace, compliance with fulfillment. And worst of all, we begin to believe that if we're not happy, something must be wrong with us. This is where happiness becomes a trap. We chase a version of it that's constant, clean, photo-ready. And when life refuses to cooperate, as it always will, we feel defective. So we buy more, do more, pretend more. We curate our lives for others. We edit our truths. We shame ourselves for being human. We forget that real happiness isn't the absence of sadness. It's the ability to feel both and still move forward. Sometimes, what hurts us most is the expectation to always be happy, the pressure to be fine, to be grateful, to look on the bright side. This pressure turns happiness into performance. It becomes something we must prove rather than something we feel. And in trying to meet that standard, we abandon parts of ourselves. We silence our grief. We deny our loneliness. We minimize our dissatisfaction because acknowledging those feelings might make us seem ungrateful or worse, broken. But the truth is, there's a kind of happiness that only comes after pain is honored. A quiet, grounded joy. Not the kind that dances across a screen, but the kind that sits with you in silence and says, I'm still here. To reach it, we have to allow ourselves to hurt. To be real. To fall apart. To admit that we're not okay all the time. Only then can happiness become authentic, not the chase. But the byproduct. This paradox also shows up in another form. When you finally get what you thought would make you happy, and it DOES in single quotes T. You reach the goal. You find the relationship. You get the house, the job, the recognition, and still something feels off. This is devastating. Because now you've run out of excuses. You did everything right, and yet the emptiness remains. The pain here is sharp. Not because you failed, but because you succeeded, and it didn't fix you. And then you ask, was the happiness even real? Did I want this, or was I just told to want it? Am I the problem? No, the problem isn't you. The problem is the idea that happiness is a fixed place. That once you get there, you stay there. But happiness isn't a place. It's a pulse. It comes and goes. It's seasonal, cyclical, alive. It's not always bright. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it hides beneath layers of grief or struggle, but it's still there. True happiness doesn't ask you to deny your pain. It invites you to carry it differently. It doesn't scream. It hums. It's found in small moments. A deep breath after crying. A hand held during fear. A laugh that surprises you in the middle of sorrow. It doesn't demand perfection. It asks for presence. So if happiness is hurting you, step back. Ask, whose happiness am I chasing? Is it real? Is it mine? Or is it an idea I inherited? A role I'm playing? A mask I'm wearing? Let go of the script. Let go of the chase. Make room for joy that coexists with complexity. Because the deepest happiness isn't found in never being sad. It's found in the courage to feel everything and still open your heart. Even if it breaks. Even if it hurts. Even if it's fleeting. That's the kind of happiness that doesn't destroy. That's the kind that heals. Obedience is often framed as virtue. It means following the rules, respecting authority, keeping the peace. From childhood, we're praised for being well-behaved, for doing as we're told. In school, in work, in religion, obedience is rewarded. It keeps things orderly, predictable, safe. But what if obedience becomes rebellion? What if following the rules becomes a form of defiance against yourself? This is the paradox. You can be so obedient to the system that you betray your own truth. Obedience in excess becomes its own kind of rebellion. Not rebellion against power, but rebellion against self. You follow the rules to such a degree that you forget why you're following them, or if they're even right. You become a mirror, reflecting the expectations of others rather than projecting. The light of your own values. It feels safe. It feels praised. But beneath that comfort grows quiet resentment. At first. It's subtle. The hesitation before saying what you really think. The tight smile when something feels wrong. The small voice inside that says no, while your mouth still says yes. You think you're doing the right thing. You're not fighting. You're not resisting. You're not making waves. But inside, you're boiling. Because obedience, when hollow, is a mask. And wearing a mask too long suffocates the person beneath. Soon. You find yourself obeying out of habit, not belief. You follow the path not because it's yours, but because it was paved before you arrived. You agree with ideas you've never questioned. You serve systems that don't serve you. You support people who wouldn't support you back. And all the while, a deeper rebellion brews. The rebellion of fatigue, of quiet despair, of feeling like you've lived a life that was never really yours. Obedience without reflection isn't morality, it's surrender. And the paradox is, you can rebel against your own instincts by trying too hard to obey the world around you. That there are moments when obeying authority requires disobeying your own conscience. Moments when being good means being silent in the face of injustice. Moments when loyalty is demanded, but truth is suppressed. Think of the employee who follows orders to meet a quota, even when those orders exploit others, or the citizen who obeys unjust laws, justifying it with, I'm just doing what I'm told, or the child who becomes the perfect adult, only to wake up one day and realize they never once made a choice for themselves. The obedience became rebellion against authenticity, rebellion against freedom. And yet, paradox deepens. Sometimes. Disobedience is the real obedience. Obedience to a higher truth, a deeper principle, a call from within. The person who breaks a rule to do what's right isn't rebelling against order, they're restoring balance. The one who walks away from tradition isn't always lost. They might be the only one who's found anything. Real. And so you must ask, what am I obeying and why? Is it fear? Is it comfort? Is it love? Is it truth? Obedience can be beautiful when it aligns with values. But when it's automatic, unquestioned, enforced through shame, it becomes a prison. The keys to that prison are difficult to find because no one tells you they've locked the door. You lock it yourself. Every time you say yes when you mean no. Every time you silence your truth to avoid tension. Every time you swallow the urge to speak, to change, to be, until one day the rebellion erupts, not in fire or fury, but in emptiness. You look at your life and realize you obeyed every rule, checked every box, pleased every voice but your own, and still you are not free. So what then? You begin again. You unlearn. You listen. You ask what is true. Not just what is approved. You begin to obey something quieter, but deeper. Yourself. The paradox remains, but it shifts shape. Obedience that rebels becomes rebellion that obeys a deeper self. You no longer follow for the sake of following. You choose. You own it. You stand tall in it, and that more than rule breaking or rule keeping is freedom. Because obedience isn't good or bad. It's just a tool. The question is, who holds it? And to what end? Let your obedience be sacred, not scared. Let it serve something honest. Let it rebel where it must. Because sometimes the most radical rebellion is becoming fully yourself in a world that only taught you how to follow. Morality is often taught as a clear path, a set of rules that distinguish right from wrong, good from bad, virtue from vice. We cling to these rules because they give us direction, offer clarity, and help us navigate an uncertain world. But what happens when morality is removed from its context? What happens when the rules we follow are applied without understanding the people, the time, or the pain behind them? This is the paradox. Morality without context can become deeply immoral. Consider the moral lessons you were taught growing up. Tell the truth. Help others. Follow the law. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. On the surface, these sound simple and universal. But when dropped into the complexities of real life, they begin to fray. Telling the truth is noble. But what if the truth endangers someone's life? Helping others is virtuous. But what if helping one person harms another? Following the law seems just. But what if the law itself is unjust? When moral rules are enforced without understanding, they lose their soul. They become hollow. And in that hollowness, harm can flourish. It's easy to judge actions from a distance. It's harder to stand inside someone's reality and understand why they chose what they did. Was the woman who stole bread from the market a criminal or a mother trying to feed her child? Is the whistleblower a traitor or the only honest voice in a corrupt machine? Context changes everything. And yet, many systems, legal, religious, cultural, strip morality of nuance. They ask only, did you break the rule? Not, what was the cost of obeying it? Not, what would you have lost by staying silent? This rigid version of morality punishes those in pain, those caught in impossible choices, those who act not out of malice, but desperation, and it allows people to feel righteous while doing harm because they're following the rules. History is full of atrocities committed in the name of moral clarity. Witch trials, purges, censorship, genocide, all justified by a belief that good and evil are easily identified, and that context doesn't matter. But it always does. The man who kneels in protest is seen as disrespectful in one context. Heroic in another. The teenager who lashes out may be labeled violent. But what if they've been abused, neglected, dehumanized? The person who refuses to conform may be branded immoral, but what if the culture itself is the problem? This is where the paradox sharpens. When morality becomes detached from empathy, it stops being moral. It becomes dogma, and dogma can destroy lives. True morality is messy. It asks hard questions. It sits with discomfort. It refuses to condemn without first understanding. It acknowledges that two good people can be in conflict, and neither may be fully right or wrong. It honors pain, not just principle, and it recognizes that morality is not a monolith. What's considered moral in one culture may be taboo in another. What's praised in one century may be condemned in the next. This doesn't mean morality is meaningless. It means morality is human, it evolves, it breathes. It must be wrestled with, not blindly obeyed. And most importantly, it must be grounded in compassion. If your morality allows you to look at someone suffering and say, they deserve it, then it's not morality. It's cruelty in disguise. If your sense of right and wrong leads you to shame, to silence, to punish without listening, then something has gone wrong. Because at the heart of moral thought is not judgment, but care, a desire to protect, to heal, to do better. So when you find yourself clinging to a moral rule, ask, who does this serve? Who does this hurt? What am I not seeing? Is this kindness or control? Is this wisdom or fear? Is this mine or something I was taught never to question? Let morality be a compass, not a cage. Let it guide you, not bind you. Let it adapt as your understanding of others deepens. Because the paradox of morality is this: when divorced from context, it can betray its own purpose. But when rooted in empathy, it becomes a living force, capable of evolving, capable of justice, capable of true good, not just rule following, but soul keeping. Loyalty is often praised as the highest form of virtue. To be loyal is to be dependable, unshakable, committed. We admire the soldier who never abandons his unit, the friend who keeps every secret, the partner who stays through every storm. We teach loyalty as the backbone of family, as the heartbeat of friendship, as the unspoken code of belonging. But what happens when loyalty is given to the wrong person, the wrong idea, the wrong cause? What happens when loyalty itself becomes the thing that leads us astray? This is the paradox. Loyalty, in its purest form, can sometimes demand that we betray what is right. At first, it feels noble. You stand by someone. You keep your word. You stay true. But slowly, a knot begins to form. The kind that pulls in your gut when your loyalty starts hurting others. Or yourself. You begin to cover for someone. You excuse things you shouldn't. You turn a blind eye. Not because you agree, but because you're loyal. You tell yourself, this isn't the time to speak up. Or, they've done so much for me. Or, it's not my place to question them. And in doing so, you participate in silence, in complicity. In the slow corrosion of truth, loyalty has a shadow. And in that shadow, injustice can thrive. Think of the employee who watches their boss exploit workers, but says nothing, out of loyalty. The family member who protects the abuser, to keep the family together. The citizen who watches their nation commit atrocities, but stays silent because real patriots don't criticize their country. Loyalty becomes a shield that deflects accountability. And behind that shield, harm continues unchecked. And yet, the world keeps rewarding loyalty. We're told to stay, to endure, to protect. Breaking away feels like betrayal, even when staying would mean betraying something deeper. Your values, your conscience, your self-thought, this is where the paradox deepens. Loyalty is not inherently good. It only becomes good when the thing you're loyal to deserves that loyalty. But we stop to ask, is this person, this idea, this system worthy of my devotion? Have they earned it? Or have I been taught to offer it blindly? Because loyalty without reflection is submission. And submission is not virtue. It's fear in disguise. There's a difference between loyalty and love. Loyalty binds. Love liberates. Loyalty says, I will stay no matter what. Love says, I will stay only as long as this serves truth. The hardest part is recognizing when your loyalty is no longer rooted in goodness, but in fear of loss. You fear losing your place, your identity, your belonging, your story. So you stay, and in staying you shrink, and yet walking away doesn't feel brave. It feels cruel. It feels like abandonment. It feels like you are the one breaking the promise, but maybe walking away is the highest form of loyalty. Loyalty to your integrity, to your voice, to a deeper kind of truth. The paradox asks us, what do we owe others? And what do we owe ourselves? When does loyalty uplift? And when does it imprison? When is it time to say, I will not be part of this anymore, even if it means standing alone? The world may not reward that kind of loyalty. You may lose friends. You may be called disloyal. You may feel guilt, but in that loss, there's also a quiet strength. You are loyal to something real. Not to power, not to comfort, not to history, but to the truth of your own soul. And that truth, however quiet, however trembling, is the only thing that can't be corrupted. True loyalty must be earned. It must be questioned. It must be chosen again and again, not because it's easy, but because it's right. And when it's no longer right, then the bravest act of loyalty is to let go. To say, I will not stand by this anymore. I choose honesty over comfort. I choose integrity over allegiance. Let loyalty be like fire, powerful, purposeful, but never out of control. Don't let it burn everything in its path. Use it to light the way, to warm those around you, to forge something stronger. And if it starts to consume you, step away, because the loyalty that costs you your truth is not loyalty at all. A is quiet destruction, disguised as virtue. Wisdom is revered in nearly every culture, every age, every philosophy. It is the prize we're all told to seek, deeper than intelligence, quieter than knowledge, more luminous than information. The wise are honored not for what they know, but for how they see, for their calm in chaos, their restraint in conflict, their understanding in uncertainty. But what good is wisdom if it remains unspoken? What power does it have if it never becomes action? This is the paradox. Wisdom that does not act may become indistinguishable from cowardice. There is a quiet kind of person who sees all. They watch the mistakes of others. They recognize what's missing, what's unjust, what's broken. They understand the deeper patterns, the hidden causes, the long-term effects, but they do nothing. They observe injustice and call it inevitable. They notice suffering and label it part of life. They recognize dangerous choices, but justify their silence as humility. They say, I am not here to judge. I am just an observer. It is not my place. But sometimes the refusal to act isn't wisdom. It's fear of being wrong, fear of losing peace, fear of disrupting the image of calm enlightenment. And so wisdom becomes a shield, one that protects the self, but not the world. We've all heard the phrase, with great power comes great responsibility. But wisdom is a kind of power, too, a subtle one. It doesn't dominate, it doesn't shout, but it holds influence. It holds potential. And when wisdom refuses to speak, to intervene, to guide, it abandons that potential. It lets others walk toward the cliff, even while seeing the fall ahead. True wisdom isn't just knowing what's right. It's doing something with that knowing, not recklessly, not arrogantly, but responsibly, even if the action is small. Even if it's a question asked at the right time, or a silence that breaks the pattern, or a truth spoken gently but firmly. Wisdom. That act doesn't need to be loud, but it must be present. There's a story told in many cultures of the wise elder who knows the right path, but allows the village to choose the wrong one, because they believe people must learn through failure, because they think interference will rob others of growth. And yes, there's truth in that. But there's also danger, because sometimes the cost of letting others learn is suffering. That could have been prevented. Is harm that could have been eased? Is damage that lingers for generations? Wisdom is not an excuse to detach. It is a call to engage carefully, compassionately, but clearly. There is a time to watch, and a time to step in, a time to reflect, and a time to risk. Because the world doesn't only need wise minds, it needs brave ones. It needs people who will act on their insight, even when it's uncomfortable, even when they'll be misunderstood, even when it's easier to stay in the cave of silence. Wisdom that never enters. The fire may stay pure, but it changes nothing. And what is the point of seeing clearly if you leave the blind to walk alone? Wisdom should not be a retreat. It should be a bridge between what is known and what must be done. A bridge between clarity and courage. Yes, acting on wisdom is risky. You might be wrong. You might fail. You might be rejected. But in the space between knowing and doing, there lives the heartbeat of change. And even if your action is imperfect, it's movement. It's a signal to the world that your wisdom is alive, not locked away in some distant tower. Let wisdom be more than a mirror. Let it be a light. And then let that light move. Let it illuminate a path. Let it call others forward. Let it create warmth in cold places. Because the paradox is not that wisdom without action is useless. It's that it risks becoming dangerous. Dangerous in its inaction. Dangerous in its passivity. Dangerous in how it teaches others that seeing is enough. Is and single quotes T. Wisdom must walk, must reach, must risk. Or else it becomes a beautiful cage, full of truth, but devoid of meaning. We praise courage like it's always noble. We teach it to children as a virtue. Be brave, we say. Stand up for what's right. Don't be afraid to act. Courage is stitched into every tale of heroism. The firefighter running into the flames, the soldier refusing to retreat, the protester standing alone against a regime. Courage is the heartbeat of defiance, the spark behind every revolution. But what happens when courage loses direction? This is the paradox. Courage, when divorced from wisdom, can become destruction, because not all courageous acts are noble. Not all defiance is righteous. Not all resistance is wise. Sometimes courage is reckless. It pushes forward without understanding the cost. It confuses stubbornness for strength, anger for principle, violence for justice. There are people who destroy everything in their path. Relationships, structures, peace, and call it bravery. They say, I had to do it. I wasn't afraid. I followed my truth. But the wake they leave behind is chaos. Courage, in its raw form, is power. And like any power, it must be tempered. A soldier who refuses to surrender may die needlessly and take others with them. A leader who charges forward with no plan may lead their people into ruin. A lover who breaks all boundaries in the name of love may leave nothing but emotional wreckage. We often forget. Destruction also requires courage. It takes boldness to burn bridges, to shatter systems, to challenge the status quo. But the question is never just, is this brave? Is this necessary? Is this just? Is this wise? True courage is not just force. It is discernment. It knows when to fight and when to let go. It knows when to stand firm and when to step back. It understands that restraint can be just as brave as defiance. There's a kind of courage that inflates the ego. That says, I'm the only one who sees the truth. I am the hero in this story, and so it acts with no regard for consequence. It steamrolls, it conquers, it believes that just because it's hard, it must be right. But true courage asks harder questions. It asks, who might this harm? What will remain after the dust settles? Am I brave or just angry? History is full of figures who are bold and destructive. Some are celebrated, some are feared. Some are both. But in the quiet corners of their stories, we see the wreckage, the broken people, the unintended consequences, the lost chances for peace. Courage can build, but it can also collapse everything, including the very thing it meant to protect. This is where the paradox deepens. Sometimes doing nothing requires the greater courage. Sometimes standing still in the storm takes more strength than charging into it. Because silence can feel like surrender, and waiting can feel like weakness. But courage isn't about constant motion. It's about aligned motion. It's not about being loud. It's about being right. Not morally perfect, but emotionally clear, measured, grounded, directed. And yes, there are times when destruction is needed, when the system must fall, when the bridge must burn, when the past must be torn away to make space for something new. But even then, what is your intention? Is your courage in service of healing? Or is it simply rage given a mask of nobility? This paradox dares you to look deeper, not at your bravery, but at its roots. Not at the noise it makes, but at the silence it leaves behind. Sometimes the person who walks away is braver than the one who stands and shouts. Sometimes forgiveness is braver than vengeance. Sometimes building quietly in the dark is more courageous than tearing down in the light. We are taught to associate courage with action, but action without awareness can be catastrophic. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the presence of clarity in the midst of fear. Let your courage be soft-spoken, but unshakable. Let it be thoughtful, but not passive. Let it burn, but not consume. Because when courage forgets its purpose, it becomes violence. And when it forgets its humanity, it becomes cruelty. So be brave, but also be kind. Be bold, but also be humble, because the courage that seeks to protect is the only kind worth having. And the rest, that's not bravery. That's just a storm in search of something to destroy. Empathy is often praised as one of the most essential human virtues. To feel what others feel. To imagine their pain. To share in their joy. To sit beside their suffering with an open heart. This, we're told, is what makes us truly human. We admire those who are empathetic. We teach it in schools. We encourage it in relationships. We call it the antidote to cruelty, the glue of community, the seed of justice. But there is a shadow side to empathy, because this is the paradox. Empathy, without boundaries, can become self-destruction. To feel deeply is powerful. But to feel without limits is to drown in everyone else's ocean. To lose the ability to breathe in your own air. Some people are so open to others' pain that they begin to carry it as their own. They absorb the emotions in the room. They weep for strangers. They bleed for the wounded, even when they have no bandage left for themselves. They confuse love with enmeshment. Compassion with sacrifice. They believe, if you're hurting, I must hurt with you. If you're broken, I must break too. If you're angry, I must burn alongside you. And at first this feels noble, holy, even, but over time, it becomes unbearable, because the weight of the world was never meant to be carried on one heart. And when empathy lacks a boundary, it begins to erode the self. You become overwhelmed, anxious, exhausted, and yet you keep saying yes. Keep listening. Keep absorbing, because how can you say no to someone in pain? But the truth is, empathy without a line is not sustainable. It leads to burnout, resentment, collapse. There's a reason flight. Attendants tell you to put on your own oxygen mask first. It's not selfishness. It's survival. You cannot pour endlessly from a cup that is never refilled. And more than that, if you're constantly caught in other people's emotions, you lose clarity, You stop being helpful. You confuse your panic for urgency, your sorrow for theirs. You may even begin to control, to overextend, to try to fix everything, not because it's truly needed, but because you can't bear to feel their suffering anymore. And suddenly, what began as compassion becomes codependence. So the paradox is clear. To truly care for others, you must also care for yourself. To be a safe place for someone else's storm, you must not become the storm. Healthy empathy includes boundaries. It says, I see your pain, but I will not drown in it. I can witness your story, but I will not lose my own. I will help, but not at the cost of my soul. This is not coldness. It is balance. That it's the difference between a lifeguard who swims with purpose and a bystander who leaps into the waves without knowing how to float. Empathy with boundaries is what allows you to be present, not overwhelmed, supportive, not swallowed. It lets you show up again and again without disappearing. There's an old saying, you can't heal the world by making yourself sick. And yet so many empaths do just that. They martyr themselves. They forget that their own pain matters too, that their rest is sacred, that boundaries are not walls. They are bridges that keep love honest. To say, I care, but I can't, is not abandonment. It is wisdom. To say, I love you, but I need space, is not rejection. It is maturity. To say, I hear you, but I need to pause, is not selfishness. It is self-awareness. And ultimately, that is the heart of true empathy. Not just feeling what others feel, but being conscious of how you engage with it. Because if your empathy destroys you, then it cannot be sustained. And if it cannot be sustained, it will eventually turn into guilt, to anger, to distance. Let your empathy be deep, but not bottomless. Let it reach far, but not consume. Let it be a hand extended, not a body thrown into every fire. Because the world needs your empathy, but it also needs your strength, your steadiness, your wholeness. Empathy is not about being everything to everyone. It's about being something true to someone in need without losing yourself in the process. That is the paradox. That is the balance. That is the path. We often think of fear as something to overcome, to conquer, to push aside. It's the villain in motivational speeches, the obstacle in every hero's journey. Be fearless, we are told. Face your fears. Feel the fear and do it anyway. But fear isn't always the enemy. Sometimes fear is the reason we survive. This is the paradox. Fear, while limiting, can also be protective. And in some cases, even wise. Fear is ancient, older than language, older than memory. It lives deep in the nervous system, rising like smoke before fire. A silent whisper before danger strikes. It tells you when to run, when to hide, when not to trust the smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Fear has saved lives for millennia, pulling people back from cliffs, warning them of predators, guiding them away from violence, manipulation, betrayal. But in the modern world, where most of our threats aren't physical, fear can feel misplaced, like a fire alarm that won't stop ringing, even when there's no smoke. You hesitate to speak, to try to trust. Because fear says, what if you fail? What if they hurt you again? What if this ends in pain? So you withdraw, you stay safe, but you stay small. This is where the paradox intensifies. Fear protects you from harm, but it also protects you from growth. It keeps the heart guarded, the mind skeptical, the hands clenched too tightly to receive anything new. But it's important to understand, this isn't fear being malicious. It's fear doing its job. The part of you that's afraid is the part that once got hurt. And it doesn't want to go back there. Fear says, I remember what happened last time. I remember how they looked at you. I remember the silence after you spoke. Fear is the inner bodyguard, sometimes too eager, sometimes overprotective, but never without reason. So what do we do with it? The answer isn't to erase fear. It's to befriend it. To sit with it, listen to its message, and ask, is this fear based on reality or on memory? Is this fear pointing to danger or to discomfort? Is this fear protecting me or preventing me? There are fears worth obeying. The fear that keeps you away from abusive people. The fear that warns you when something feels off. The fear that tightens your chest before you enter a room filled with cruelty. But then there are fears that need to be gently challenged. The fear of rejection. The fear of being seen. The fear of changing who you've always been. Because those fears are not guards. They're ghosts. And if you let them, they will haunt every opportunity for love. For transformation. For liberation. The paradox is this. You can feel fear and still move. You can listen to fear without obeying it. You can honor fear without worshiping it. Let fear be a signal, not a sentence. Let it raise a flag. But don't let it build a wall. And sometimes the most protective thing fear can do is remind you to move slowly. Not to freeze, but to breathe. Fear doesn't always mean stop. Sometimes it means pay attention. Sometimes it means this matters. Sometimes it means this is sacred. Imagine a parent pulling their child back from the street. That's fear. Imagine a gut instinct before a toxic deal is made. That's fear. Imagine the stillness before a hard truth is spoken aloud. That's fear. But now imagine never crossing the street again. Never trusting another human again. Never speaking truth again. That's what happens when fear becomes the master. Fear is meant to be a messenger, not a ruler. You don't banish fear. You walk beside it. You say, I hear you. I know you're trying to keep me safe, but I've got this now. And in doing so, you allow fear to do its real work, to sharpen your awareness, to deepen your courage, to remind you of what truly matters, because sometimes the presence of fear means you are standing on the edge of something important, and choosing to leap despite it is where your life begins again. Despair is a heavy word. It conjures images of darkness, silence, a soul collapsing inward. It's the opposite of hope, the point at which all lights seem to have gone out, when no answers come and nothing feels worth reaching for. And most stories, despair is the low point. The pit, the place the hero must escape before the true journey can continue. We are taught to resist despair, to fear it, to avoid it like a contagion. But what if despair isn't only an absence? What if hidden beneath its weight is a form of awakening? This is the paradox. Despair, though seemingly hollow, can lead to a deeper kind of clarity, one that joy alone could never reveal. To understand this, we must first ask what causes despair. It's not simply sadness. Sadness comes and goes. Despair is more fundamental. It arises when the narratives we once believed about life, meaning, love, success collapse. It is the void left behind when a person realizes, what I built my identity on may not be real. My dreams might not be enough. The world might not be as just or as kind as I once thought. In that moment, you're not just mourning a situation, you're mourning an entire framework. And that is terrifying. But it's also honest. Despair does not lie. It doesn't dress things up. It doesn't offer illusions. It strips you bare. It takes everything you clung to for certainty and leaves you with nothing, except perhaps one quiet question. What is left when everything else falls away? This is where the transformation begins. Because in the stillness of despair, in the silence that remains when the noise is gone, you may begin to hear something else, something deeper, not answers, necessarily, but presence, a kind of raw truth that bypasses slogans, expectations, and roles. Some of the world's greatest philosophers, mystics, and artists describe having descended into despair, only to find not a new ideology, but a new way of being. Despair cleared the illusions. And in their place came a kind of brutal honesty followed by strange peace. Consider this. The tree does not grow taller simply because the sun shines. It grows stronger when its roots are forced downward, deep into the dark soil. Despair is that soil. You wouldn't wish for it. But once you've touched it, you are no longer fooled by surface light. You recognize false hope. You detect shallow certainty. You begin to seek what is real, even if it's uncomfortable. That's what enlightenment from despair looks like. Not bliss, but wisdom. A man may spend his life chasing status, believing it will make him whole, until he loses everything. In that despair, he realizes that what he was chasing was never actually the thing he needed. A woman may believe love will save her until it leaves her empty. And in that ache, she begins to ask what it truly means to love herself. A society may believe in progress until its systems break. And in the collective despair, a new kind of vision may emerge, one built not on illusions, but on shared truth. Of course, despair can destroy. It can break the spirit if left untreated, especially if we're forced to walk through it alone. But this is the paradox. Despair can also illuminate the deepest parts of ourselves, not despite the pain, but through it. It invites us to stop running, to stop numbing, to face the quiet, terrifying question, what truly matters when nothing seems to? And in that moment, we may finally begin, not from the top, but from the ground beneath everything, from the roots, from the source. Despair clears the surface so we can build something more real, not optimism, but meaning. Not fantasy, but presence. Not escape, but awareness. So if you find yourself in despair, don't rush to fix it. Don't reach for distraction. Sit with it if you can. Let it speak. Let it empty you of everything false. And then listen to what remains, because sometimes what grows in the shadow is not a curse, but the beginning of truth. We like to think of truth as something solid, fixed, final, a foundation we can stand on, a compass we can trust. After all, if truth isn't stable, what is? But what happens when the truth changes? Not because it was a lie, but because we grew, because we discovered more. Because reality itself revealed a different shape. This is the paradox. Truth is essential, yet it evolves. It gives us meaning, and yet refuses to remain static. It demands both faith and flexibility. Imagine a child looking at the sky. They say, the sun moves across the sky, and they're not wrong from their vantage point. It absolutely appears that way. But then they learn, no, the earth rotates. The sun isn't moving across us. We're moving around it. Same sky, different truth. Truth didn't betray them. It expanded. And yet, that expansion requires something difficult. The willingness to admit that what you once believed was not the whole story. This is hard for the human mind. We crave certainty. We anchor our identities to what we know. Religious truths, political truths, personal truths. We say, this is who I am. This is how the world works. This is what matters. And then something shifts. A betrayal, a revelation, a scientific breakthrough, a painful conversation, an honest question, and the truth changes shape. Now you must decide. Do you cling to the old truth because it feels safe? Or do you walk toward the new one, even if it destabilizes everything? This is where many people get stuck. They mistake evolution for error. They fear that if their old truth was incomplete, then everything they believed was wrong. But that's not how truth works. Truth, like a living organism, adapts. It sheds old skin. It responds to new light. The truth of a 20-year-old is not the same as the truth of a 60-year-old. And it's not supposed to be the truth of someone before trauma may not match the truth they hold afterward. The truth before love, before loss, before awakening is not erased, but deepened. And yet, the paradox is this. Every version of truth may have been real at the time. That doesn't make them lies. It makes them layers. Think of an artist who paints the same scene in 3 different stages of life. As a teenager. Bright colors, hopeful, bold outlines. In middle age, muted tones, shadows, complexity. In old age, minimal brushstrokes, a kind of stillness. Which one is true? All of them, they represent different encounters with the same mystery. That's what truth is, not a fixed point. But a path, not a destination, but a relationship. And like any relationship, it asks for humility. The humility to say, I didn't see this before. I was wrong. I see it differently now. This is not weakness. This is strength. Only those willing to let truth grow can receive its deeper gifts. Of course, some truths are more stable than others. The law of gravity doesn't shift because you had a bad day. 2 plus 2 won't suddenly equal 5. But when it comes to emotional truth, psychological truth, moral truth, existential truth, these are shaped by context, time, and revelation. And in this space, growth requires letting go. Letting go of the comfort of knowing. Letting go of the ego's need to be right. Letting go of past certainties that no longer serve the present self. It's unsettling. But also liberating. Because when truth can change, it means you can change too. It means the beliefs that once hurt you don't have to bind you. It means the roles you once played don't define your future. It means who you were doesn't limit who you're becoming. That's the deeper paradox. The only constant truth. Maybe the need to keep searching. To remain curious. To ask again. To look again. To say what else might be true. And perhaps in the end, truth isn't about certainty at all, but about honesty. The honesty to say, this is what I see, and I'm willing to see more. The ego is often blamed for our suffering. It's the mask we wear, the character we play, the voice that says, this is me. But who is the me it speaks of? What is the self the ego defends so fiercely? What happens when we realize that? The thing doing the defending might be hollow, an echo of identity rather than identity itself. This is the paradox. The ego constantly tries to preserve a self that may not actually exist. It builds walls around an illusion and calls it home. To understand this, let's start with how ego is formed. From the moment you're born, you are labeled, given a name, assigned a family, placed into roles. You are praised for certain behaviors, punished for others. You learn what earns approval, what gets rejected, and from these experiences, the ego begins to crystallize. I am smart. I am weak. I am funny. I am unworthy. I am strong. I am broken. But none of these are the self. They are stories. They are strategies for navigating a world that demands definition. The ego is a storyteller, a survivor, a mirror reflecting what it thinks others want to see. And the more it builds, the more it forgets it's building. Soon, we believe, I am this role. I am this story. I am this name, this job, this belief, this face. But what happens when those things fall apart? When the career ends? When the relationship dissolves? When the body ages? When the belief no longer holds. The ego panics because its entire identity is threatened. But the self underneath, it doesn't panic because it may never have needed the ego to begin with. This is the terrifying, liberating possibility. There may be no fixed self, only awareness, only presence. Eastern philosophies have explored this idea for centuries. In Buddhism, the concept of anatta, no self, teaches that the self is a process, not an entity. In Hindu Vedanta, the ego is seen as a ahamkara, the I maker, a useful tool, but not the ultimate truth. In modern psychology, even thinkers like Carl Jung acknowledged the ego as a construction, a negotiator between the inner world and outer demands. But if the ego is a mask, who or what is wearing it? That's where the paradox deepens. Because the moment you try to point to the self beneath the ego, you're still using the ego to do it. The observer tries to observe itself. The eye tries to look at itself directly. It's like chasing your own shadow. Yet, even in this impossible loop, something is aware. There is a presence, a witnessing, a beingness. And that presence does not need a story. It does not need a label. It simply is. So why does the ego exist? Because it's useful up to a point. It helps us navigate social situations. It helps us form goals, maintain boundaries, survive danger. It gives us a sense of narrative continuity in a chaotic world. But when we confuse the ego for the self, we become trapped in performance. We start living for appearances. We chase validation. We fear rejection, not just socially, but existentially, as if losing a role means losing existence. And here lies the suffering. because no matter how well the ego performs, it is never satisfied. That it always fears being found out, being outdated, being outdone. That is never enough because it was never real to begin with. But this doesn't mean we must destroy the ego. The goal is not ego death. It's ego transparency. To see through the ego. Rather than be blinded by it. To use the ego as a tool, not worship it as a god. You can still have a name, a story, a style, a passion, but without mistaking it for the totality of who you are. You become the actor who knows they're playing a role, not the actor who thinks they are the character. And in that knowing, there is freedom. The paradox is resolved not by choosing ego or no self, but by recognizing both. Yes, you have an identity. Yes, it matters. But no, it is not the whole truth. The awareness behind the mask. That's where the stillness lives. That's where peace begins. So ask yourself, if I stop defending who I think I am, what remains? If I loosen the grip on me, who is still here, watching, not as a concept, not as a theory, but as the quiet presence beneath all stories, that is the self the ego can never define, and the one it spends its life trying to protect, even though it never needed protection at all. We want the world to be fair. We crave justice, not just as a legal principle, but as a moral rhythm we hope the universe follows. Good should be rewarded. Evil should be punished. Order should prevail. Justice should be blind, but not heartless. And yet, what happens when justice is served? Without mercy? What if the scales are perfectly balanced, but the soul is crushed beneath them? This is the paradox. Justice, when pursued without mercy, becomes a kind of cruelty. And mercy, when overextended, risks betraying justice. We think of justice as the act of setting things right. But right is never just about facts. It's about context, intention, compassion, human frailty. True justice asks, was the rule broken? But mercy asks, why was it broken? And what will happen if I respond with grace instead of retribution? Imagine a child who steals food. Justice says, theft is wrong. Punish them. Mercy says, they were starving. Feed them. Now, imagine a tyrant who manipulates, exploits, harms with impunity. Mercy says, they're broken too. Justice says, but they must be stopped. And so we teeter too much justice and the world becomes a machine, cold, relentless, unforgiving. A world of unbending law, where intention doesn't matter and people become statistics. Too much mercy and the world becomes chaos. A place where there are no consequences, no accountability, and the strong prey freely on the weak. So we build courts, we write laws, we argue over penalties and exceptions. We seek fairness, but true fairness is slippery because people are messy. Their motives are layered. Their histories are complex. Their actions are often born from wounds we don't see. So when we say we want justice, what do we really want? Punishment. Prevention? Redemption? Revenge? Even in our own lives, this paradox plays out. Someone hurts you. They lie. They betray. They abandon. Do you demand justice? Or do you offer mercy? Do you cut them out? Or do you try to understand what led them there? One path might protect your dignity. The other might open a door to healing. Neither guarantees peace, because here's the truth. Justice without mercy becomes inhuman. But mercy without justice becomes meaningless. Forgiveness that doesn't acknowledge harm isn't noble. It's denial. Punishment that doesn't consider. The full story isn't strength. It's blindness. Think of history's worst atrocities. Often, they were justified as justice. A twisted justice that saw enemies where they were neighbors. That saw sins where there were only differences. That turned laws into weapons. And mercy? It was absent. Deliberately erased. Because mercy requires imagination. It requires seeing the other as human even when it's hard, but it also requires courage to draw a line. To say, I understand you, but I will not excuse this. This is where the deepest form of justice lives, not in perfect punishment, but in transformation. Restorative justice tries to walk this path. It asks not just what law was broken, but what harm was done and how can it be made right. It brings victim and offender together, not always to forgive, but to be seen. Because sometimes the truest justice is letting both sides become human again. In our relationships, we often want that too. We want to be forgiven, but also understood. We want to hold others accountable, but also give them the chance to change. The paradox is that we're all both judge and prisoner, witness and accused, wronged and wrongdoer. We live in a courtroom of the soul, and every verdict must balance truth and grace. So, what can we do? We can stop rushing to punish and start pausing to ask deeper questions. We can defend the innocent without losing our compassion for the guilty. We can hold space for pain without letting it justify harm. And perhaps most importantly, we can learn to offer to ourselves what we often deny others, a justice that heals, and a mercy that doesn't lie. Because in the end, we do not need perfect justice. We need justice infused with humanity. That's the kind that doesn't just balance the scales. It mends what was broken. We are told that choice is freedom. The more options you have, the freer you are. The more decisions you get to make, the more empowered you become. From breakfast cereals to belief systems, from career paths to romantic partners, modern life bombards us with the luxury of choosing. But beneath this glittering array of decisions lies a quiet trap. What if your choices are not truly free? What if every option you select was already shaped by forces outside your control, your upbringing, your culture, your neurology, your trauma? What if the freedom to choose is just an illusion carefully crafted by systems that ensure you never question the range of options presented to you? This is the paradox. We believe we are free because we can choose, but sometimes the choices themselves are cages. You choose between two political candidates, but both are funded by the same corporate interests. You choose between different brands of water, but all were sourced from the same exploited aquifer. You choose your job, your clothes, your social media profile, your religion, but did you choose the lens through which you evaluate those things? Or was it given to you before you ever knew what choosing meant? Freedom is not merely the act of picking between doors. It's questioning why those are the only doors you can see. It's realizing that a maze full of options is still a trap. If all the paths lead you back to the same place. In consumerism, this illusion thrives. We believe more options equal more freedom, but too many options paralyze us. They make us anxious. They distract us from the real question. Why are we choosing at all? And who benefits from us thinking we are? A man raised in a deeply conservative environment may one day choose to uphold those values, but is that a free choice? Or the only one he was ever allowed to imagine? A woman shaped by years of societal beauty standards may choose to change her body, but is that empowerment? Or internalized conditioning? Even our most personal decisions, who to love, what to believe, what to fear, often rest on foundations we did not build ourselves. This is not to say we are robots, helpless against the tide, but true freedom requires awareness. And awareness begins with doubt. To be free, you must first see the invisible walls around you. The scripts handed to you, the values you absorbed before you could resist them. And even then, freedom is fragile, because even once you awaken to the illusion, you still live in a world governed by rules, systems, consequences. You may be free to speak, but that freedom might cost you your safety, your job, your community. You may be free to leave a relationship, but not free from the grief that follows. You may be free to start over, but not free from the weight of your past. So what is real freedom? Maybe it's not about having more choices. Maybe it's about knowing who you are when all choices are stripped away. Maybe it's not about control, but consciousness. To look at a choice and ask, why do I want this? Who taught me to want this? What am I afraid will happen if I don't choose it? Sometimes the most radical act of freedom is to reject the whole menu and ask for something that was never offered, or to stop choosing altogether, and simply sit in the stillness where no identity is needed. No role performed in that silence. The paradox loosens. You begin to sense a space within you untouched by conditioning, a place that observes your thoughts without becoming them. And from there, choice becomes sacred. Not frantic, not performative, not reactive, but intentional. Even if the world around you remains constraining, you've made contact with a deeper autonomy, the kind that doesn't need permission to be free. Because real freedom isn't just choosing. It's knowing why you choose, how you choose, and who you are when all choosing ends. You've wandered through 25 dilemmas, each one a mirror that doesn't quite reflect, a path that loops into itself, a question that refuses to settle. And maybe by now you've noticed something unsettling. None of them had answers, at least not the kind that end a conversation. Because these paradoxes don't close doors, they open them to doubt, to depth, to discomfort, to the kind of clarity that doesn't erase complexity but embraces it. We live in a world that craves resolution, but some truths live in tension. Some lives can only be honored by not simplifying them. And some freedoms come not from solving but from seeing. You're not meant to agree with everything here. You're meant to feel the pull, to question your own frameworks, to sit in the space between opposites and ask, what does this say about me? Maybe you're not here for answers anymore. Maybe you're here to learn to listen differently. To yourself, to the world, to the quiet echo of meaning that doesn't shout but whispers. So if these paradoxes have left you restless, uncertain, even a little transformed, good, you touched something honest. Because the most powerful truths are the ones we can't explain, only carry. And in that carrying we become something new.